Welcome to the Leadership with Vision podcast by Austin Gardner. For more information and resources, visit worldevangelism.net.
All right, I am here in Lima in the Fata Ministries with Joe Kotvas. You have already heard two different podcasts from him. And Nate, if you could put the link on each of these to the others so that people will be able to go back and listen. Joe is a great advocate for reaching deaf people. He is a great man of God. I've known him for years. He's faithful. He loves Jesus, and he's being greatly used. And this is a ministry that I know I am lacking in and I need instruction in. And so today, he's going to talk about a lot. He'll throw stuff in he wants to talk about, but also should there be deaf ministries or in other parts of the world? Is there really a place? Fata seems to be like a niche ministry, and so maybe there's not that much of a need for it. Maybe if we just taught our churches to have a deaf ministry. So I'll let you take it from there.
Well, one of the things I want people to understand is, why do we reach the deaf? Is there an attitude about it in the Bible? Well, there is. In Exodus chapter 4 and verse 11, God tells Moses specifically that he made deaf people. He made deaf people on purpose. So many people think, well, we have deafness and blindness and disabled people because of the sin nature and the corruption of the DNA because of sin, and that's why they have them. But God clearly states he made deaf and blind people. He did it on purpose. He cares about them. And the Bible also tells us that God puts a special protection for deaf people. It tells people not to mock the deaf and not to put a stumbling block before the blind. He doesn't say that about everybody, but he sure says it about them. And then you see in the Bible there are three instances very clearly that talks about the attitude of the Lord Jesus Christ in dealing with people who have disabilities or dysfunctions. In John chapter 5, we have the blind man who was healed. In John chapter 9, we have the crippled man. 5 is the crippled man at the pool. Then we have John chapter 9, the man who was born blind. And his disciples have the same attitude that most people have, especially in third world countries that have a lot of Catholicism, or even probably some Muslim countries think this way because they're throwaway people to them, is who did sin that this man was born blind? Was it him or his parents? Well, I always ask people, how could the guy have sinned being born blind? What did he do in his mother's womb that was so sinful to cause him to be born blind? I mean, it was a ridiculous question, but it's a question that displayed the attitude in the mindset of the people at the time. And Jesus said that neither his parents nor he sinned, but that the works of God should be made manifest. The man at the pool of Bethesda was 38 years crippled, 38 years waiting for the moving of the waters, and nobody was there to put him in. Nobody would take him. Nobody cared enough to put him in the pool. Oh, they brought him there. He hung out there until one day Jesus passed by and healed him. The blind man, Jesus passed by and healed him. Then in Mark chapter 7, starting approximately verse 31 to the end of the chapter, we see how a deaf man was brought to Jesus by friends. But unfortunately, the attitude of the friends was different. Jesus had already been by there, and it seems like they just wanted to see a healing show. They wanted to see a faith healer. They wanted him to smack him on the head and heal him. And Jesus took the deaf man apart. Why did he take the deaf man apart? No other place in the Bible do you see Jesus healing somebody by taking him apart. One place he kicks the people out because they were making fun of him. When he raised the girl from the dead, they were making fun of him, mocking him. He kicked them out, and then he healed her. Well, with the deaf man in Mark chapter 7, Jesus took the deaf man aside from the crowd, aside from his friends. He showed the deaf man dignity. He showed the deaf man he loved him, he cared about him. The deaf man had no idea who Jesus was. The deaf man didn't know who this guy was. He just knows the guys he worked with, or his friends, brought him over here and started talking to this guy, flapping their jaws, and all of a sudden this guy's pulling him aside. And then a miracle happened. Jesus begins to do his work. He sticks his finger in the guy's ears. He spits and touches his tongue. He looks down in sighs, looks up to heaven, and says, "Ephphatha, be open." And straightway, his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. Now, I could preach a whole message or two on that passage of Scripture, and I have. But the point I want you to see is, it wasn't the fact that Jesus physiologically healed this man. This was a deaf man that has never heard a cogent word. A deaf man that did not have a formal sign language. A deaf man who never, ever even could utter by mimicking, by feeling somebody's vocal cords, a word because he had a problem, a physiological problem, that his tongue was actually tied and he could not speak. 90% of deaf people can speak, they just don't do it because they know the way they sound. But this guy wasn't even in that percentage. So here he was, and Jesus said, "Be open." And the Bible says after 6 months of physical therapy and training and 2 or 3 years of language instruction, he could say, "Mommy." No, that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says, and straightway he spake plain. What language did he speak? Probably Greek. How many years does a college student take to even learn Greek language to understand his Bible good? 3, 4, 5. Did they ever stop learning? But this guy spoke it like it was his mother's tongue, like he'd learned it all his life. That's why they marveled in such a way. He made the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. They greatly marveled at what Jesus did, and God got the glory once again. again. You see, God wants to get the glory through these people who are special needs people, and not only in what he can do with and in their lives, but in how we react and care for these people. When we show that agape love of God, that unconditional love of God, and going out and doing the pure religion that James talks about and reaching these people on purpose, we're doing God's work, and it reflects in the way people think about us. I can remember there were some Catholic nuns and many lost people who have come by Ephatha and seen the work, and when they hear what we do, they have not a clue what the Lord's work is, but they say, oh, you're doing the Lord's work, and it makes an impact on them. God gets the glory in how we react and interact with people who are special needs. Well, unfortunately, around the world, it's not that way. And around the world, they have that same mindset that his disciples had. And around the world, in India, for example, they'll throw deaf children to the crocodile. In Muslim countries, they just throw they're discardable people. They have no value. Here in Peru, there was a lady. We knocked on the door. Some of our folks are out soul when they knock on the door. And they said, we understand there's a deaf person that lives in this house. We'd like to talk to them if that'd be all right. The mom invited them in and was talking to them. And the mom said this, there's nobody deaf in our house. Nobody deaf. What was interesting, though, in the living room of that house, there was a young man sitting on the couch watching this whole exchange. Well, one of the guys noticed that and he went over to talk to him. He was deaf. His own mother was denying that there was a deaf person in the house and the deaf person was sitting right there on the couch because they felt we must have made a great sin. We must have done something wrong. It's the same spirit. One of our children has Down syndrome. When that baby was born, a very well-intentioned member of our church, a deaf lady, in fact, who has been a close friend of ours for years, just said something, wasn't thinking about what she was saying. She said, what did you guys do wrong? And it hurt my wife. After all these years of working with special people, it hurt my wife to think that they would think somebody did something wrong, and that's why our baby was born with Down syndrome. Nobody did anything wrong. It just happens. It's what the Lord ordained to happen. And therefore, there's a person with Down syndrome. And now that little boy brings so much joy and life into our home and into our ministry. But the fact of the matter is, around the world, that mindset doesn't exist. Around the world, maybe, except for maybe European countries and westernized nations that are well advanced, that have great training and education programs in a secular sense for the deaf, but there is still a lot of biases and a great need. In Africa, for example, there are many, many countries. If there was a missionary who could go to work specifically with the deaf, and there are some, there's a missionary from Africa, I can't remember his name. I believe he graduated from Crown College, if I'm not mistaken. Joseph, I think is his name. But he's done a great work over there from what I heard. I haven't heard anything about him for several years, but a ministry to hundreds of deaf, orphanages, because there's nothing else for them. You see, in America, the deaf communities are somewhat not, their deaf churches and deaf ministries aren't in vogue as much as they used to be. It used to be every church, there was a big thing, just like the bus ministry. I have a bus ministry, I have a deaf ministry. Nowadays, it's not so big because those are difficult ministries. They're hard ministries, and they don't bring in a lot of tithes and offerings to the plate. And so therefore, the first person that gets cut is the deaf pastor. Or if they're going to have a deaf pastor, he's also got to be the janitor. I mean, it's the way they're treated. And so the fact of the matter is this: deaf people need to get saved. They're not going to get saved by a televangelist. They're not going to get saved by a gospel tract, probably not. They're not going to get saved by a podcast. They're not going to get saved by an open air meeting. They're not going to be saved by being brought to a church and sitting on the front pew so they can see what the guy's saying. They're only going to get saved if somebody on purpose goes to them in their language, learns their language, and reaches them with the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ on purpose. That's the way it has to happen. And they're not going to get saved on the first contact, and they're probably not going to get saved on the second contact. You have to build a foundation because deaf people's thinking is concrete, and concepts such as faith, love, grace, all of those are abstract concepts that have to be taught. And hearing people learn them by nature of receiving knowledge and in many different gates of senses. But the deaf people don't have a primary gate. Helen Keller, who was deaf and blind, famous author Helen Keller, deaf and blind. Helen Keller said that her deafness was her greatest disability. Not her blindness, but her deafness. Because deafness greatly affects our ability to interact and communicate, whereas blindness, I may not be able to tell you what the color red is, but we can have a conversation about many things, and I can understand abstract concepts. But deafness doesn't give me that. Abstract concepts take time. Now you say, why do you work with the deaf? Well, the Lord put it in our heart to do it. I got in the deaf ministry, as I said a couple of podcasts ago, because of a pretty girl. But God put it in my heart to love what I saw, and He gave me an ability to work with the deaf. And over the years, I have continued to grow in that ability. You know, is it frustrating? Yes. Have I wanted to throw in the towel? So many times I cannot tell you. Have I wanted to just pack up and quit because it's frustrating? Absolutely. Do I get dispirited, discouraged working with the deaf? Many times. They're frank people. They tell it like it is, and then they have a hard time understanding. And so, but when a girl or a young boy have been with you for 3 years, and you have given them a language they never had because they came to school at 12 years old without a language, and all of a sudden the light comes on, click, boom, and they get wonderfully saved. There is no replacement for that. And I say, for every 10, 20, 100 people that get saved. It's so exciting to see one deaf person get saved. The amount of work it takes to get a deaf person saved is great, but worth every bit of it.
Well, tell me, if I were looking at being a missionary to Africa, you mentioned Africa, what would I need to do? How would I go about being a missionary to deaf people in Africa?
First thing I would recommend is, obviously, make sure it's what the Lord has called you to do as best you can, but don't let that stop you from doing it. If you have a desire, if you desire a good thing, you ought to go for that desire and let the Lord open the doors or shut them as they go. One of the greatest things for me is God never actually said, Joe, go to Peru. He didn't call me here in a way of a verbal, audible calling, or I was reading my Bible, a finger pointed, boom, go to Peru. That didn't happen. I came down on a visit because my wife worked here for 3 months as a summer missionary. We knew the missionaries, and I had a young lady that was teaching sign language in our home church, and she said she wanted to learn more about getting involved in deaf ministry and deaf education. So I said the best place to do that would be go to Peru, South America, where Vernon and Vilma are, and where they have a deaf school, and you can learn how to work with deaf children there. And I said, we'll even go with you. She backed out, and we came anyways. And I said, when I got to Peru, I hate this place. It stunk. It was ugly. It was trash everywhere. Rats, cockroaches. There were naked people playing in the trash. The streets were yucky. There was dust everywhere. You could wipe plate, and a minute later it was full of dust again. I got sick. It was horrible. And I told my wife, we're up there, and the missionary was saying things like this. Well, if you come to work with me, how would you like us to fix the apartment for you? And I told him, Vernon, we're not here. I'm not looking for a mission trip. In fact, a pastor in the States was getting ready to reg me to take a church in Naples, Florida. So, well, but if you come here, no. I went up to the department. We were from Monday. Thursday comes up. I go up into the apartment. I tell my wife, I said, we are not coming here. There's no way on earth I'd be coming here. And my wife's looking at me with cross eyes. What are you talking about? Then Friday, we went to another city, Chosica, which was clean. The air was fresh. You could see the blue sky. It was a whole different world. I smelled fresh air for a while. Came back. And the Lord just began to work on me. This missionary was getting older. His health was not so good, and he needed help. And I knew that God was preparing me for something. And I just knew you gave me the ability of sign language. You gave me all my experiences in the military, traveling all over the world. You allowed me to be a law enforcement officer to be able to deal with difficult situations. And here I am at a ministry that actually really need help. So as we were flying home, a hurricane hit Miami, and they diverted us to Venezuela. And for 3 days, I'm sitting in a hotel room with my wife in Venezuela, and all we have time to do is talk, think, and pray. And when I get home to the church, the first thing out of my pastor's mouth was, well, what? Because even on that Friday, the missionary said, as we were getting ready to leave, when you come to Peru, how do you want us to fix your apartment? I said, Vernon, we haven't even gotten to the if yet. There is no when. In God's eyes, you don't say no. And so I got home. My wife talked, we could do that. No, yeah, we could. And I said, I'm going to go down and help Vernon. The Lord shuts the door. We'll know. The Lord didn't shut a door. He knocked the wall down and brought us down with our 5 children to Peru. And all those things that were negatives, they still existed, but there was a different mindset in my heart. So if you're considering mission field, first thing I would say was go on a mission trip. Come to Peru. Come see what it's like to work with the deaf. Come see what it's like to have a ministry to the deaf in a place that's not the most commodous place in the world. Now, we've made it as nice as we can inside, but it's still 2.5 world country. And then think about it. Let the Lord use what you see, let it touch your heart, and that'll affect your action. And so if you have decided you want to be a missionary to the deaf, you want to go and you don't know what to do, I would say come to Peru and work with us for 2 years. Get trained to work with the deaf. It doesn't matter what sign language you learn. What matters is you learn how to work with deaf people, because the subculture of the deaf, regardless of the sign language, is the same. And so you work with the deaf, you learn how to work with the deaf, and then you go to the country that you want to work with, and you begin a deaf ministry there. You might have to modify some methodology because of the fact that you're starting from scratch, but at least one thing will be sure. You'll know how to work with the deaf, and you will have developed the heart to stay there and do the job. So I would suggest you come to Peru, you come work with us. We have some other ministries here. We can send you to the jungle for a while. We can send you to the mountainous ministry for a while. We can send you to Ecuador, where Ray Bradley is, for a while, who has a ministry similar to ours. And there's another missionary in Peru called Lee Johnson. He has a ministry up in Chiclayo. We can get you connected so that you can have taste the different ministries of people working with the deaf and better prepare you to go to a place like Africa or the Middle East or some place where very few people are working with the deaf, where there is a higher percentage of deaf people in those countries. In third world countries, especially in places like Africa, the percentage of deaf and hard of hearing people almost reaches 10% in some of those places because of the economic melees, because of the lack of medical intervention, because of the traumas. And so therefore, you would have instant ministry. Be able to go in there. Muslim countries, you might be able to get into a Muslim country and just say you want to start an orphanage for deaf people, and they may even leave you alone. So I don't know. I've never been in a Muslim country for any length of time other than Turkey and Egypt, but I've never been there to work ministry-wise, and so I can't tell you what the mindset is there. But I can tell you this. There are over 300 to 400 million deaf or hard of hearing people in the world today. If you put them all together, they'd be the third largest country in the world. But in every one of the 200 more or less countries of the world, there are deaf people. There's only one country I know of that doesn't have any deaf people, and that's a little small declared deaf island that some guy owns, and it's probably him and his family that live there. Apart from that, there are deaf people everywhere. Every state in the state of Florida, the United States has deaf people. Every country in South America has deaf people. Yet the numbers of missionaries to deaf, there's one missionary to the deaf for every 4 countries. Every 4 countries. And I don't remember what the statistic is. I have it in my book. It tells you how many missionaries there are for hearing people per country. I think it's like 8 missionaries per country. But for the deaf, it's not that way. So the need's great. And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. So I want to encourage you, if you want to work with have a uniquely challenging ministry, ask the Lord, is that something I can do? I would say begin learning sign language where you're at. If you have no sign language knowledge, begin learning sign language where you're at. Find a deaf friend. Become their friend and learn from them. Get immersed in their community. That will tell you whether you can survive in that community or not. And I will tell you this, if you mess up with them, it's going to take a long time for you to get their confidence back. Deaf people have long memory. They don't easily forget when they feel like they've been offended or wrong. So just take that as it is. It's a hard ministry. We've had many people come here, I want to work with that. Oh, Brother Joe, I love your ministry. I want to work with the deaf. They come here in 6 months, they're gone, never to be seen again because it's a very difficult ministry. So, but if you're up for a challenge and God puts it on your heart, just put your hands to the plow and go forward.
So if you're a hearing person and there's this deaf league, and if you were in the States, could you go join their bowling league? Would they let you in?
Some would. Because of my involvement in the community, they would let me probably be part of the league. Some might have rules that prohibit it. You just have to, it depends on the group that you're with. But if you're a new signer and you're a new learner and you have a deaf friend that vouches for you, they will accept you in the community. If you abide by the rules. And I'm talking about the unspoken rules that you do your best to sign when no matter what's going on, whatever conversation's going on, you're signing. You're not just talking. Or you show respect for them when you're learning sign language. They tell you, they correct your signs. You accept their correction without question, and you just and you actually work in their community and advocate for them. If you really get into their community, then you're well accepted. And I'm not talking about just on a professional level. I mean on a social level. You already mentioned in one of the podcasts my unique laugh. Well, I do have a unique personality in more ways. And the deaf at my church really accepted me because of that personality. Does that mean I didn't have conflicts with some? Oh yeah, there were some conflicts. Does that mean that sometimes you actually do know better than the deaf person and they don't want to admit? It's the best time sometimes just keep your mouth shut and try to correct them sometimes, even though you know you're right. Because I've had deaf pastors come down here, they want to preach something, it just wasn't biblical. And I've had to try to mention it to them. They don't want to hear it. I've been to Bible college. Who are you? Just because you're a hearing person? You think the Lord over me? That's their mind. They look at genuine desire to help and be a blessing as trying to control them. And why is it that? Because there are so many codependents in the deaf community. People are codependent on deaf and just have to be helpers. They just have to help the poor little deaf people. And so people reject that. They want you to know I'm on an even keel with you. If you have something to teach me that's real, there's a way to do it. But don't do it like you're going to be helping the poor little person on. So, they don't want it.
All right. Well, any final things you'd like to say? We've done 3 podcasts. Anything else you want to rip on here real quick?
Well, just understand one thing. There's no one right way to do deaf ministry. There are many people who are involved in deaf ministry, many good organizations that work with deaf people, and some may have a different philosophy from me. I can promise you, deaf pastors would disagree with my personal position on deaf church. It is what it is. Okay. But my experience here in Peru and my experience, now let me just found that just a little bit. In Peru, we had, when I got here, 10 deaf churches in Peru in 10 different cities, all led by deaf men. None of those ministries exist as they were then. Only one of the deaf pastors that existed at that time, and he wasn't even a deaf pastor's own ministry, still exists in the ministry today. And he's one that I did training on. The rest of them are all out of ministry. The rest of them have all been disqualified. And none of their churches, the only ones, the churches that survive in their ministry are ones that we have been able to continue to maintain and have put other people in. So that's not a criticism of the missionary that was here at the time. He did the best he could do with what he had and with the knowledge that he was able to do. And for a time, you could think, wow, it was the premier ministry in the world for deaf ministry. Reality struck, and it just because of sin, because of lack of funding, whatever the case may be, none of those are out there today. So we have meticulously, slowly have tried to rebuild, putting more deaf ministries with hearing or deaf leaders in certain communities. But there are biases amongst deaf. Deaf have a hard time accepting a hearing leader if that hearing leader really hasn't been accepted in the deaf community. And so here's another issue that has affected deaf ministry, and this is really affected in the States. Social media has really hurt deaf, and here's why. One of the main points of socialization for deaf people for years was their local church ministry. That's where they got all their fellowship, all their social. Well, when social media such as Facebook and Twitter and Glide and all of these various ways of keeping in contact and communicating came about, they no longer needed the local church as the hub of socialization. And because of that, those deaf are really not there because they're really growing spiritually, but there because of the social aspect of ministry. Those people weeded themselves out. So now you have the deaf that are there because that is their only social connect, or they love God and want to learn about the Lord and want to and understand the principles of the local church and are there because they want to be there. But generally speaking, it's really hurt. Well, in Peru, we've been affected by that same reality. And so deaf ministry today is I almost want to say, in one sense, is more real because the people who are coming want to be coming because of something that they're getting spiritually as opposed to just social.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to everybody and excite them about deaf ministry. How about one personal question, and you can just elaborate on this?
Okay.
You were in law enforcement.
Correct.
Did you get shot?
I I did.
Won't you tell us that story? I told some of the guys this. They don't believe me, so I'll let you tell your own story.
You remind me of my pastor. My pastor, when I'd be in the pulpit, he hey guys, he'd pull my suit jacket up and say, look what he's got back here. I'm like, preacher, don't do that. But anyways, let me say this. If you want a verse for deaf ministry,
Let's go change the subject.
Psalm 90:17. And let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish thou the works of our hands upon us. Yea, the work of our hand establish thou it. There's you a good life verse for deaf ministry, asking God to establish the work of our hand. Now back to your question. I was working while I was between good jobs and so forth. I was working in a construction job, working on maintaining construction barricades on construction sites. And my workshop was actually in a 2 blocks from my home, and it was in a very dangerous neighborhood where we lived. And I had just come back. I was at that time in the reserves, the police reserves for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. And I had just come back from in-service training, and I had a little snub-nosed revolver at that time, and I kept it in my boot in a holster. Well, that afternoon, as I was loading up my maintenance truck, I noticed something very odd. The first thing was there were train cars. There was a railroad track right next to our warehouse, and there hardly ever was train cars there. But this day, there was a train car there. And on the other side of that train car was one of those silver switching boxes. And on the switching box, I could see the shadow of a couple of people moving around. See, I don't like that. So it just didn't look right. So I took the gun from my boot and put it in the back of my shirt and untucked my shirt tail and put it down. And I looked out later, they were gone. Well, what had happened was 2 people saw someone was working in there, and they had stolen a car. And in the car they had stolen was a 9mm Taurus or a Beretta. And so it had gotten dark, and I was just now getting ready to close up. I was tying off barricades in my truck. I was in the back of the truck, and this Jeep Cherokee pulls up on the road, crosses the railroad tracks, and stops. It had tinted windows, and the back passenger window rolls down. And it must have been a 13-year-old kid. Says, hey, can you tell us how to get to some street, College Avenue, I think they asked for. And I said, yeah, I was giving them directions. Just go here, you go there. And all of a sudden, 3 of those doors open up, and this guy comes out with this Taurus 9mm, points it at me and says, don't move. Get out of the truck. So I'm complying. Nothing I can do right now. So I get out of the truck, and they asked me to get into the warehouse. So I get into the warehouse, and they told me to get on the ground. They're going to frisk me and take my money. Well, I ain't letting them frisk me. They're not touching. So I get on my back. Why did I get on my back? Where was my gun? My back. Well, while I did that, the guy with the gun held it on me, and the other 2 went to move the car. Well, while he did that, I get up on my feet, and the guy says, what are you doing? I said, listen, if you were to die today, you know where you go. What? What you learn is you try to control the situation best you can, keep them off guard. Well, you have to understand, even though I was in the police reserves at this time, I didn't have the training that I had after I went full time. So they did not teach us gun disarming tactics in the Reserve Academy. So I wasn't sure how to do that, but I got the guy close enough to me where I was able to grab the gun. Fortunately for me, he did not squeeze the trigger because we were dancing with the gun at my torso and head. I finally just let it go. Well, by that time, the other 2 had come in, and the one kid said to the other, give me the gun, I'll shoot him. Give me the gun, I'll kill him. So as the guy was giving him the gun, he said, give me your wallet. I reach back, I pull my wallet out of my pocket. Of course, my wallet has my badge in it, and I pull the gun out of my back behind my back. And as I'm bringing the gun around, one of the guys saw it that was over on the other corner. He says, he's got a gun. So the guy starts shooting. The first shot went through my upper thigh and all the way out the back. All 14 other shots killed the microwave, killed everything else behind me. But only the one shot hit me. I had a little snub-nosed 5 shot, and as I was moving and running, I'm squeezing just to get him off of me. So he goes and hides behind batteries, and I'm hiding behind the Coke machine. Well, before this, they tried to hit me with a rebar, but I kept hugging the Coke machine, so they kept hitting the Coke machine and not me. And so at that time, I had thought I had fired all 5 shots. I didn't. I only fired 4. The guy starts coming out from behind the batteries. I said, listen, just go. Just go. Just hold your gun up and just go. I was in no condition to fight off 3 people at that time. So one guy starts creeping out, and I noticed that the slide mechanism was locked back on his pistol. Well, you know what that means. He was out of bullets. So now here's where I made my mistake. Now, say what you will, even I'm not perfect. But instead of putting my gun on him and saying, if you move, I'll blow your head off, I'm thinking in my mind, I don't have bullets either. And so I charge the guy. And I take my pistol and I smack him upside the head. The other 2 kids are just running off. And I'm grappling with this guy with a hole in my leg, combat boots on, and I grab him by the hair, and he slipped out from under me and started running away. So I start chasing him down the railroad track. Now, you got to understand, I'm wearing heavy steel-toed combat boots. This guy's running with felony fly or something, and he's gone. And I never was a fast runner anyway. So I'm limping back, and I call the police, and they come and yada, yada, yada. They found the car. They never found the guys. But fact of the matter is, that's how I got shot. And just before he ran out the door, he slipped out of my hands. He was running. He was not 2 feet from, not even a foot from me. I raised my weapon. I had it on his head, and I squeezed trigger. So I thought I was out of ammunition. Well, later, after we reviewed, I opened the cylinder of the gun, and that bullet was still the firing pin did not strike hard enough to make the bullet go. I took that gun to the range a month later, and that bullet fired just fine. It was not that young boy's time to die. I only can think of it was a divine intervention. Maybe that man's preaching some today. I have no idea. But I do know one thing. Or maybe God said, you won't be able to live with yourself if you shoot this kid in the the back of the head while he's trying to run away. That may have been the case. I still would have been justified. It would still have been a justified shoot, but maybe the Lord said you wouldn't be able to handle that. I have no idea to this day. And I second guess myself for a long time about that and all the things that I did, what I could have done better. And here's what my defensive tactics instructor told me at the police academy when I went to full academy. He says, you won that altercation. I said, what? He says, you won. You survived. You're not dead. You won. He says, you kept your cool. You did everything you thought you could do at the time of the training you had, and you won. You ought to be proud of yourself. I said, well, okay, that makes me feel better. You said that. But the fact of the matter is, when you have multiple attackers, there's only one strategy: run. Because I don't care how much jitsu, kung fu, karate, kuku you know, against multiple attackers, that is the only strategy that really works. So take that for what it is.
Well, here's my buddy, been shot, deaf worker and leg shot man. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you'll get in touch with Jeff. With Joe. You can contact him at jkotvas at fata.org, and go look at his webpage at fata.org, and we would love to see you get in ministry to help reach deaf people around the world. God bless each of you.
You've been listening to Leadership with Vision by Austin Gardner. Visit worldevangelism.net to discover more podcasts and useful articles.